The Iran war is about to make your chai fan more expensive, and it has nothing to do with oil. So a few days ago, I made a video when oil hit $115. Since then, the US bombed the island that handles 90% of Iran's oil exports, Qatar's entire LNG production went offline, and Iran's new supreme leader hasn't been seen or heard from since taking power. The question is no longer what happens when oil spikes. It is what happens if this war drags on for months. I went through every major institutional forecast that I could find. Oxford Economics, MSCI, the IMF, and the Fed. And the picture they are painting is pretty scary. So on March 13, the US struck Kap Island. This is the island that handles 90% of Iran's crude exports. Now, even before this strike, Iran's crude exports were already down by 50% since the war started. Oil revenue makes up 25 to 40% of Iran's entire government budget. And with Kap being hit on top of that, they are now financially cornered. And this isn't just a US and Israel versus Iran conflict anymore. Iran has retaliated against at least 11 countries. UAE's largest refinery got hit, Saudi Aramco was struck for the second time, and Bahrain declared force majeure after their refinery was set on fire, meaning they literally cannot ship oil anymore. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Russia is feeding intelligence to Iran, and while China isn't directly involved in this conflict, they've positioned an intelligence vessel near the Gulf of Oman to track US naval movements, essentially treating this war as a live training exercise to study how America fights. So where does that leave us today? Oil is currently sitting at about $103 per barrel. In response, the IEA has released 400 million barrels from strategic reserves to try to stabilize prices, the largest coordinated release ever. That only covers roughly 26 days of Hormuz supply disruption. So while it buys time, it doesn't actually fix anything. Neither side is backing down either. Trump has demanded Iran to unconditionally surrender, but Iran has said that they are not seeking a ceasefire. And with both sides talking like Xiao Lang, it doesn't seem like this war is going to end anytime soon. So how bad can this actually get? Now, if you want to start investing, you need to keep your costs low. That's why I use Interactive Brokers. With Interactive Brokers, you are paying just 35 cents per trade on the US stock market. That's one of the lowest in the industry. They also give you access to Ireland domiciled ETFs, which can save you a chunk of dividend withholding taxes. And if you are not sure what to invest in, they also have a bunch of free company research tools built right into the platform, so you can do your homework before putting your hard-earned money in. Check out my link in the description to get started. Alright, now back to the video. The Oxford Economics published a scenario analysis with 3 tiers. In the moderate scenario, oil stays at around $100 per barrel and the conflicts last about 2 months. That's still manageable and we won't land into a recession. However, in the severe scenario, if oil hits $140 and stays there for 2 months, that's where things start to break. The UK and Japan will all enter into a recession. The US economy would grind to a near standstill and the world CPI inflation would spike to 5.8%. And then there's the prolonged scenario. If Hormuz stays closed long enough for the IEA's strategic reserves to run out, oil will stay above $120. At that point, governments would have to start rationing fuel. The last time this happened during the 1973 oil embargo, Americans could only buy gas on certain days based on the license plate number. Gas stations had armed guards and people had to wait in 5-mile lines just to fuel up. Now, the good news is most banks don't think we'll hit the severe scenario. According to JP Morgan, they believe that inflation and not recession is the most likely outcome. But even in that case, Morgan Stanley warns that the pain could be delayed. Real consumption typically declines 2 to 3 months after an oil shock and stays depressed for another 5 to 6 months. So even if oil stabilizes tomorrow, the economic drag would play out over the next few months. And here's what makes it worse. The Fed is now trapped. They can't cut rates because inflation is rising and they can't raise rates because the economy is weakening. So for now, we are on our own. But MSCI pointed out something even more important. Since 2006, geopolitical shocks have typically caused losses that's faded within a month. But when the conflict triggers a sustained supply disruption, like the Russian-Ukraine war, the damage will spread to stocks, bonds, and currencies, while keeping inflation high long enough to drag down the entire economy. And that's exactly what's happening right now. Except that the disruption isn't just coming from oil, it's also coming from something most people aren't even watching. Fertilizer. When Qatar halted LNG production that took 20% of the world's LNG supply offline. Since then, the price of natural gas has surged by over 50%. And here's why that matters. Natural gas is the raw material used to make urea, aka nitrogen fertilizer, which accounts for 59% of all global fertilizer use. And nearly half of that goes straight into the grains and cereals that we eat every day. Without gas, most of the world's fertilizer production grinds to a halt. And that's exactly what's at risk, because around 30% of the world's urea exports pass through the Strait of Hormuz. If that supply gets cut off, food prices would go up everywhere. According to the IMF, every 1% increase in fertilizer prices pushes food prices up by 0.45%. Urea is already up 77% since December. So if you do the math, that's already a 35% increase in food commodity prices. And what makes this even more dangerous is the timing. Planting season is happening right now, from March through May. Farmers need fertilizer today. So even if the war ends tomorrow, it will be too late, as the crop damage is already locked in for the year. But it gets worse. When food prices spike, countries panic. They start banning food exports to protect their own supply. India did it with wheat in 2022. Indonesia did it with palm oil. And when countries start hoarding, it makes the shortage worse for everyone else. Prices go up, more countries ban export. Prices go up again. It's a vicious cycle. And it is already starting. In fact, we saw this exact pattern play out in 2022 when fertilizer disruptions happened due to the Russian-Ukraine war. It pushed millions of people into poverty and hunger. Global food prices hit decade highs, and the current disruption through Hormuz is even bigger than before. So what does all this actually mean for us back here in Singapore? Singapore is uniquely exposed to this crisis. We generate 95% of our electricity from imported natural gas, and 47% of our LNG comes from Qatar, which, as mentioned earlier, has halted production. On top of that, our pipe gas agreements with Indonesia and Malaysia are set to expire by 2027 to 2028. Now, to be fair, the government has said that we are not completely exposed. About half of our gas still comes from pipelines from the region, and that's unaffected. We also import LNG from the US and Australia, not just the Middle East. And the government has also set up fuel stockpiles and made sure our power plants can switch from gas to diesel in an emergency. But here's the thing, none of that fixes the price problem. Even if supply holds, costs are still going to go up. And then there's food. Singapore imports over 90% of its food. So when global food prices go up, we feel it directly. And the best way to see it is through chicken rice. In 2022, when the Ukraine war first hit, hawker food prices jumped 5.7%. The following year, they jumped another 6.1%. During that 2 years, a plate of chicken rice went from $3.45 to $4.15. So if the same pattern plays out again, we are looking at close to $5 of chicken rice per plate. Hosei. Meanwhile, petrol prices have jumped about 20% in just 2 weeks since the war started. And analysts are saying that we could see another 15 to 20% on top of that. So how would all this affect you? Back in 2022 to 2023, Singapore core inflation hit 4 to 5%. So let's say your household spends about $4,000 a month. At 4 to 5%, you'll be paying $160 to $200 more every single month just to maintain the same lifestyle. That means your household spend will go up by $2,000 to $2,400 a year. And that was just the spillover from the Ukraine war. The current disruption through Hormuz affects more of our supply chain than Ukraine ever did. Now, of course, the government is always ready to step in if things get worse. For example, back then, they expanded U-Save rebates for HDB households and enhanced CDC vouchers. But let's be honest, that's just a band-aid on a structural problem. If Hormuz stays closed, no voucher program would be able to fix a 47% gas supply gap. In short, nobody knows how long this will last. Some say weeks, others say months. But the fertilizer problem means that even if this war ends tomorrow, your grocery bill isn't coming back down this year. If you haven't already, now is a good time to make sure you have an emergency fund in place. Not because I'm predicting the worst case, but because preparation now is always better than panic later on. Keep some of the cash on the side, review your expenses, and stay informed. Anyway, that's all for this video. Hope you found it useful. Like, share, and subscribe as I'll be posting new videos every week.